6 in the morning, and the sweet potato pies were already spoken for. Not reserved, just gone. Somebody's aunt came through before sunrise, took everyone, and the rest of the block had to settle for whatever was left behind the glass. That was a black bakery. You showed up early or you went home without. Number 19 on this list was a pound cake so heavy it took 2 hands to carry. Number 7 is a caramel cake that took 4 hours to frost and 4 minutes to sell. And number 2 was a cookie so plain that trained pastry chefs would have laughed at it, but people drove across town for a bag. Every one of these foods held a neighborhood together. Then the neighborhood changed, and the bakery locked the door for good. Hit subscribe because these are disappearing while nobody pays attention. Here are 25 foods every black bakery sold out of by noon that disappeared. Number 25, hot water cornbread. This was a ball of cornmeal mixed with boiling water, shaped by hand, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the outside cracked like glass. Black bakeries in the rural South sold it wrapped in wax paper, still warm for almost nothing. You bought it on the way to work. You bought it on the way home. The outside shattered when you bit into it, and the inside was soft enough to melt on your tongue. The only seasoning was salt, and the only fat was whatever the skillet had been seasoned with over the years. It was the cheapest thing in the case, and it sold out first every single morning. When the bakeries closed, hot water cornbread moved back into private kitchens, and most of those kitchens eventually went quiet too. Number 24, molasses cookies. Dark, thick, chewy, dusted with granulated sugar that cracked across the top in the oven. These were not Christmas cookies. In black bakeries across the deep South, they sat in the case year-round, stacked on parchment paper, sold by the dozen. The molasses came from the same sugarcane supply chain that built the plantations. The women who baked them knew that history. They baked them anyway, and the cookies were better for it. A good molasses cookie was soft in the center and firm at the edge, and the kitchen smelled like somebody had been working since 4 in the morning. Grocery store versions today are thin imitations. The originals left when the bakeries did. Number 23, blackberry dumplings. The berries came from the fence line behind the church or from a child who picked them for pocket money. The dumplings were strips of dough dropped into a pot of simmering, sweetened blackberries until they went soft and purple and the juice thickened into syrup around them. Black bakeries sold them in paper cups with a plastic spoon. They were seasonal. When the berries came in, the dumplings appeared. When the season ended, they vanished. Nobody froze them. Nobody shipped them. You got them fresh or you did not get them at all. The juice stained your fingers and your shirt and nobody cared. Today, most people under 40 have never seen a blackberry dumpling, let alone bought one from a bakery counter. Number 22, lemon icebox pie, a graham cracker crust filled with condensed milk, egg yolks, and fresh lemon juice, chilled until it set firm enough to slice clean. No oven required after the crust was done. Black bakeries kept them in glass refrigerator cases, cut into wedges, sold 1 slice at a time. The filling was tart enough to make your eyes narrow and sweet enough to pull you back for a second piece. In summer, a lemon icebox pie was the coldest, sharpest thing in the case, and on a hot Saturday, it was the first to go. Whole pies disappeared before lunchtime. When commercial bakeries began selling frozen key lime pies at half the labor, the handmade lemon icebox version lost the price war. The bakeries that made it right could not compete with the factory that never had to squeeze a lemon. Number 21, pineapple upside down cake. The presentation sold it before the taste did. A cast iron skillet lined with butter and brown sugar, pineapple rings pressed into the bottom with the maraschino cherry centered in each one, batter poured over the top, and the whole thing baked until the edges went dark and sticky. When the baker flipped it onto a plate, the fruit sat on top like stained glass in a church window. Black bakeries sold them whole or by the slice, and the slices never lasted. Past mid-morning, children pressed their faces against the display case just to look at it. When canned pineapple got more expensive and bakery rents climbed, the upside-down cake was one of the first casualties. The labor did not justify the price the neighborhood could pay. Here is something worth understanding before this list goes further. A black bakery was not a franchise. It was not a brand. It was a kitchen that outgrew the house. A woman baked for her church, then for her street, then for the neighborhood, and one day there was a folding table in the front room and a handwritten price list taped to the screen door. No commercial lease, no sign on the building, just a reputation built one cake at a time. These bakeries existed because the mainstream ones would not serve black customers, or they served them through a side window, or they charged more for the same loaf of bread. So the neighborhood made its own. When those neighborhoods were cut apart by highways, hollowed out by urban renewal, and scattered by migration, the bakeries closed. Not because they failed, because the community they served was taken apart around them. Number 20, chess pie. Nobody agrees on where the name came from. Some say it was just pie spoken fast. Some say the filling was stored in a pie chest. What everybody agrees on is how it tasted. Butter, sugar, eggs, and a splash of vinegar baked inside a thin pastry shell until the custard barely set and trembled when you carried the plate. Black bakeries across the Carolinas and Virginia sold chess pie by the slice for pocket change. It was the pie you bought when the pecan was too expensive. That was not a weakness. That was its calling. It did its work without decoration or apology. Today, chess pie appears in upscale Southern restaurants at prices that would have bought an entire pie at the original bakery, and nobody credits the women who perfected it. Number 19, butter pound cake, a pound of butter, a pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, a pound of flour. That was the recipe, and that was the name. No leavening agent, no frosting, no decoration. 4 ingredients measured by weight and beaten by hand until the batter poured like heavy cream. A real butter pound cake weighed enough to anchor a table and tasted like nothing a box mix has ever come close to. The crumb was tight, almost waxy, and it held moisture for days without drying out. Black bakeries sold them whole, wrapped in aluminum foil, and customers carried them out cradled in both arms like something precious. The mixing alone was a physical act. Before electric stand mixers became affordable, the butter and sugar were creamed by hand with a wooden spoon in a heavy bowl, sometimes for 30 minutes straight until the mixture turned pale and doubled in volume. Eggs went in one at a time. The flour was folded, never stirred, and the baker could feel in her wrist when the batter was right. A pound cake was a funeral cake. It was a welcome to the neighborhood cake. It was what you brought to someone's door when you did not know what else to carry, because nobody refused a pound cake and nobody had a bad word to say about one. It crossed every line in the community, rich or struggling, Baptist or Methodist, young or old. The pound cake showed up wherever people gathered. When supermarkets started stacking factory-made versions in plastic clamshells, the handmade pound cake began to disappear from bakery cases. The supermarket version was cheaper and available 7 days a week. It was also dry, bland, and flavored with synthetic vanilla, but convenience won the shelf space. The bakeries that still make a proper butter pound cake from scratch can be counted without running out of fingers. The grocery store took the name, The taste never came with it. Number 18, fried hand pies. Crescent-shaped pockets of dough filled with sweetened fruit, pinched shut along the edge with a fork and dropped into hot oil until the crust blistered and turned golden brown. Peach was the standard. Apple was close behind. Sweet potato filling showed up in the fall. Black bakeries sold them in brown paper bags, 2 or 3 at a time, and the grease soaked through the paper before you made it home. They were portable, cheap, and filling. A ham pie was breakfast for someone heading to a job that did not offer a lunch break. The commercial versions sold at gas stations today are cardboard shells filled with corn syrup. The originals were made with real fruit, real lard, and real hands. Nobody manufactures that. Number 17, jelly layer cake. 2 or 3 rounds of plain yellow cake stacked with nothing between them but a thick spread of homemade jelly. Blackberry, plum, or muscadine grape, depending on what came ripe that month. No buttercream, no fondant, no frosting of any kind. The jelly was the entire event. It soaked into the crumb just enough to stain it purple, and the layers held together by faith and gravity. Black bakeries sold jelly cakes whole, and they disappeared before noon because the price was low and the flavor was everything the fancy cakes pretended to be. When commercial frostings took over the display case, the jelly cake looked too plain to compete. It lost on appearance, never on taste. The people who remember it still talk about it like a secret that deserved better. Number 16, pecan pralines. A disc of caramelized sugar studded with whole pecans, cooked in a heavy pot until the mixture reached the soft cracked stage, then spooned onto wax paper in puddles that hardened into candy. Black bakeries from New Orleans to Mobile sold them stacked in glass jars on the counter. You bought one for a few coins. They crumbled when you bit into them, sweet and gritty and rich with butter, and the pecan flavor stayed on your tongue for an hour. Today, pralines are a tourist product in the French Quarter, wrapped in cellophane and sold at a premium. The originals came from black kitchens, where the pecan trees grew in the backyard, and the sugar was cooked by someone who learned the soft crack stage by listening, not by reading a thermometer. Number 15, bread pudding. Stale bread torn into pieces, soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, then baked until the top crisped and the center stayed soft enough to eat with a spoon. This was a bakery item born from waste. Day-old bread that did not sell became tomorrow's pudding. Black bakeries served it warm in foil pans, sometimes with a drizzle of sweetened condensed milk on top, sometimes plain. A slice cost next to nothing and filled you up for the afternoon. The beauty of bread pudding was that it turned failure into something worth standing in line for. Leftover bread was not trash. It was an ingredient with a second life. When the bakeries closed, the bread just went to the dumpster. Number 14, coconut cake. A tall white 3-layer cake covered in swirls of boiled icing and blanketed in shredded coconut, so thick it looked like it had been rolled in snow. Making one took the better part of a day. The icing alone required standing over a pot with a candy thermometer, beating egg whites to stiff peaks and folding the hot sugar syrup in at exactly the right moment. Too early and the icing stayed flat. Too late and it seized into a grainy paste. The coconut had to be fresh. In the rural South, that meant cracking a whole coconut with a hammer, prying the meat out and grating it by hand on a box grater. The shredded coconut clung to the icing while it was still tacky, and by the time it set, the cake looked like a centerpiece more than a dessert. Black bakeries that sold coconut cake built their reputation around it. It was the cake for Easter, for homecoming Sunday, for the pastor's birthday. One coconut cake in the display case could sell out an entire morning because people called ahead, sent their children, and arrived early to claim a whole one before it was cut into slices. The smell alone held the room. Fresh coconut has a sweetness that the bagged kind cannot replicate, and when it met the warm icing, the fragrance filled the bakery from the kitchen to the sidewalk. People who walked past the door and caught that scent came inside, even if they had no intention of buying anything. They bought something. The labor killed it. Fresh coconut is hard to find in chain grocery stores today. Boiled icing does not survive in a commercial refrigerator. And the women who knew how to make it right, who could judge the sugar temperature by the sound of the bubbles and the pull of the spoon, are fewer every year. Bagged sweetened coconut and canned frosting produce a cake that shares the name but not the experience. Here is the part of this story that does not get told enough. These bakeries did not just sell food, they moved money through the neighborhood. A black bakery bought flour from a local supplier, eggs from a neighbor with chickens, butter from whoever had it. The woman behind the counter hired her niece to work the register and her cousin to deliver orders on Saturday. When the bakery earned $1, that dollar stayed on the block. It paid for school clothes, church tithes, a car repair, a light bill. When the bakery closed, the dollar left. It went to a grocery chain headquartered in another state, to a frozen dessert brand owned by a corporation, to a franchise bakery that sent its profits somewhere else entirely. Losing a black bakery was not just losing a cake, it was losing a local economy that ran on flour and trust. Number 13, Sock It To Me cake, a dense, buttery bundt cake with a ribbon of cinnamon and brown sugar running through the center and a thin glaze drizzled over the top. The name was borrowed from a comedy show, but the cake belonged to black kitchens long before television adopted the phrase. Bakeries sold the whole ring on a paper plate or cut it into thick wedges. The cinnamon swirl was the reveal. You did not see it until the first slice came out, and then every piece after that was a negotiation over who got the most filling. Grocery stores eventually sold boxed cake mixes under the same name, and the bakery version stopped making financial sense. A box cost a fraction of the ingredients, and the result was close enough to satisfy someone who had never tasted the original. Number 12, sweet potato bread, a quick bread made from mashed sweet potatoes, cinnamon, nutmeg, and just enough flour to hold it together. It came out of the oven, dark orange and fragrant, sliced thick, and sold wrapped in plastic at the register. Some bakeries topped it with a brown sugar glaze. Others left it plain and let the sweet potato do the talking. It was denser than banana bread and sweeter than cornbread, and it disappeared fast because it worked for breakfast, lunch, or dessert without apology. Sweet potato bread followed the crop cycle. When the sweet potatoes came in from the garden or the local market, the bread appeared in the case. When they ran out, the bread vanished until the next harvest. Nobody asked for it off season because nobody expected a bakery to sell what the ground was not giving. Number 11, brown sugar fudge, not chocolate, brown sugar, butter, and cream cooked in a heavy pot until it reached the soft ball stage, poured onto a greased pan, and scored into squares before it fully set. The texture was crumbly and sandy, not smooth like commercial fudge, and the flavor was deep, dark caramel with a hint of molasses from the brown sugar. Black bakeries in Alabama and Mississippi kept a tray of it near the register, sold by the piece. Children bought it with coins they earned running errands. Adults bought it with a look that said they had been eating it since they were the ones running errands. When the bakeries closed, brown sugar fudge moved to church-baked sales, and when the church women aged out of baking, it stopped showing up altogether. Number 10, banana pudding, not the instant kind with Cool Whip on top, the real version built in layers. A custard cooked from scratch on the stovetop with egg yolks, sugar, milk, and real vanilla, poured warm over a bed of vanilla wafers and sliced bananas, then crowned with a meringue made from the leftover egg whites and browned under the broiler. Black bakeries served it in foil pans with clear lids, sold whole or by the scoop. It was a fixture at every family reunion, but the bakery version had a precision to it that home cooks rarely matched. The custard was smoother, the meringue was taller, and the wafers softened to exactly the right point. Today, banana pudding still exists, but the from-scratch bakery version with broiled meringue has been replaced almost everywhere by a cold trifle made with boxed pudding mix. The name survived. The craft behind it did not. Number 9, Lane cake, a white layer cake soaked in bourbon, filled with a cooked mixture of raisins, pecans, coconut, and egg yolks, and frosted with a boiled white icing. The filling was the secret. It was almost a confection on its own, rich and dark and alcoholic enough that children were told to wait until they were older. Lane cake came from Alabama, and black bakeries in the Deep South sold it as a holiday cake. It required real skill and real patience. The filling had to be cooked slowly to keep the eggs from scrambling, and the bourbon had to be folded in at the right temperature. When the older bakers retired, the recipe went with them. Few people under 50 have ever tasted a proper Lane cake. Number 8, German chocolate cake, not the boxed version. The original, made with a bar of sweet baking chocolate melted into the batter, layered with a coconut pecan, frosting cooked on the stovetop until it thickened and turned golden. This cake had nothing to do with Germany. The chocolate was named after a man named Samuel German, and black bakeries in Texas and Louisiana made it a signature long before grocery stores started selling it from a freezer case. The homemade frosting was the difference. It was sticky, sweet, loaded with toasted pecans and shredded coconut, and it took patience to cook without burning. The frozen versions skipped the toasting, used corn syrup instead of sugar, and replaced real coconut with sweetened flakes. Same name, different cake entirely. Number 7, caramel cake. This is the one that separated a great black bakery from a good one. 3 layers of butter cake, golden and tender, stacked with caramel icing between each layer and poured over the top so it ran down the sides in slow, uneven rivers. The icing was the test. Real caramel icing started with white sugar melted dry in a cast iron skillet. No water, no syrup, just dry sugar turning liquid over high heat. It cooked past amber to the edge of burnt, then was shocked with cold butter, a pour of evaporated milk, and a capful of vanilla. The whole mixture had to be beaten by hand until it cooled just enough to spread, but not so much that it hardened in the pot. There was a window of about 2 minutes. Miss it and the icing turned to cement in the saucepan. Hit it and the cake looked like it had been glazed by a jeweler. Every black bakery that could make a proper caramel cake was known for it, the same way a barbecue joint is known for its ribs. It was the proven ground. The reputation of the whole bakery rested on whether the caramel icing poured right. Customers ordered them days in advance for birthdays, funerals, and Sunday dinners. A whole caramel cake in the display case would be claimed before the baker finished wiping down the counter. Children stood on tiptoe to watch the icing set. The reason it disappeared is plain. The icing is punishing to make. 1 degree too hot and the sugar scorches. 1 minute too long on the beating and it seizes and will not spread. Young bakers tried and failed and moved on to buttercream because buttercream forgives mistakes. Caramel icing does not forgive anything. The women who mastered it are in their 70s and 80s now, and most of them have stopped taking orders. Number 6, peach cobbler, a deep baking dish filled with sliced peaches, swimming in their own sweetened juice, covered with a thick layer of dough that baked into something between a biscuit and a dumpling. Not a crumble, not a crisp, a proper cobbler with a top crust that puffed and browned and cracked where the juice bubbled through. Black bakeries in Georgia and the Carolinas sold peach cobbler by the pan in summer, warm with a spoon stuck in the foil. A pan barely made it to noon. When fresh peach season ended, so did the cobbler. The canned version some bakeries switched to never tasted right, and the customers knew the difference. They stopped buying, and the cobbler stopped being worth the trouble. Number 5, red velvet cake. Not the bright artificial red sold in chain bakeries today. The original red velvet cake got its color from a chemical reaction between cocoa powder and buttermilk, which gave the batter a reddish-brown tint. No food coloring required. The texture was fine and velvety, hence the name, and it was frosted with an ermine icing made from flour cooked into milk, then whipped with butter and sugar until it turned light and creamy. Black bakeries across the South made red velvet for every occasion, and the subtle cocoa flavor underneath the tang of the buttermilk was what made it special. The modern version drowns the batter in red dye and buries it under cream cheese. Frosting, the color survived, the cake behind it did not. Number 4, buttermilk biscuits. Not from a can, not from a freezer, made from flour, lard, or butter, buttermilk, and a pinch of baking soda, cut by hand with a juice glass or a biscuit cutter passed down from somebody's mother. Black bakeries sold biscuits by the bag, warm before 7 in the morning, and they were gone long before the cakes came out of the oven. A proper buttermilk biscuit had layers you could peel apart with your fingers, and the inside was soft enough to hold butter without it running off the edge. Biscuits were the first thing baked and the first thing sold. When the bakeries disappeared, the biscuit became a fast food product. What shows up in a drive-through bag does not compare. Number 3, 7-Up cake, a tall golden pound cake made with a full bottle of 7-Up soda poured directly into the batter. The carbonation acted as a leavening agent, and the lemon lime flavor worked its way into every crumb without tasting artificial. The cake rose higher than a standard pound cake, stayed moist for days, and had a faint citrus sweetness that people could not quite identify until they were told the secret. Black bakeries sold 7-Up cakes whole, and they sold fast because the cake was a conversation piece as much as a dessert. Somebody always asked how it was made. The baker rarely told. When the older generation of bakers retired, the recipe circulated online, but the precision required to get it right kept most attempts from matching the original. Number 2, tea cakes. A soft, round, barely sweet cookie the size of a grown man's palm, made with butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and a scrape of nutmeg. No chocolate chips, no sprinkles, no icing. Tea cakes looked like nothing special, and that was the entire deception. They were plain enough to embarrass a pastry case, and yet they were the item people remembered decades after the bakery that sold them was gone. Black bakeries across the South kept a tray of tea cakes near the register, stacked in rows, sold for coins. Children bought them after school. Adults bought them and said nothing because the cookie tasted exactly like their grandmother's kitchen. Tea cakes were not about flavor so much as about memory. Each one was a portal to a place that no longer exists. When the bakeries closed, the tea cake did not migrate to grocery shelves. It was too plain, too cheap, too quiet. Commercial bakeries could not sell a cookie that needed a childhood to explain it. Number 1, sweet potato pie, not pumpkin, sweet potato, baked in a single crust with mashed sweet potatoes, butter, condensed milk, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a pinch of vanilla, smooth enough to tremble when you set the plate down. This was the foundation. Every black bakery, that ever opened a door sold sweet potato pie, and every one of them sold out of it first. It was Thanksgiving and Christmas, and Tuesday and Saturday. It was the pie that ended arguments at family reunions and started new ones about whose recipe was better. Sweet potato pie carried the entire tradition of black baking in a single crust. It said, "We took what the land gave us, we made it beautiful, and we fed everyone we love with it." The bakeries are mostly gone now. The sweet potato pie is still here, but fewer and fewer people are making it the way the bakeries did, by hand, from scratch, with sweet potatoes, roasted whole, and mashed with a fork. The frozen versions fill the shelf space. The name is on the box, but the woman who made it is not inside. The glass case is empty now. The folding table is in somebody's garage. The screen door with the handwritten price list was taken off the hinges years ago. But those 25 foods were not just products. They were proof that a neighborhood could feed itself with skill, with pride, and with ingredients that cost almost nothing.
Oyster dressing with cornbread base was where the ocean met the South. It was born along the coasts, where oysters were plentiful and cooks knew how to stretch the sea into something hearty. The oysters were chopped and folded into crumbled cornbread, seasoned with celery, onions, butter, and broth. The smell was rich, a blend of salt, smoke, and sage that filled the house with warmth. For families who had migrated north, this dish carried the taste of home across miles and memories. It was luxurious but humble, decadent but familiar. The cornbread gave it soul, the oysters gave it elegance, and together they created something rare. A dish that tasted like both past and progress. On Thanksgiving tables, oyster dressing was more than a side. It was a story of travel, adaptation, and pride. Peanut brittle crackled like glass when broken, a sound that always announced the start of Christmas. Sugar boiled on the stove until golden, and roasted peanuts were stirred in fast, the smell filling the kitchen with toasted sweetness. You needed courage to make it. Just a few seconds too long, and it would scorch beyond repair. But when it turned out right, it shone like amber, sweet and sharp all at once. Every Southern Black household had someone who made it best, someone whose brittle snapped perfectly between the teeth. It was candy made with heart and heat, meant to be shared from tins wrapped in ribbon. The pieces stuck to your fingers and sometimes your teeth, but that only made it better. Peanut brittle was a labor of love, born of resourcefulness and shared as generosity. It wasn't bought, it was earned. Sequin stockings brought shimmer to homes that believed in making the most of what they had. Mothers and daughters sat together on living room floors, stitching and gluing sequins onto old stockings until they sparkled like starlight. No one bought new ones. They reinvented the old. Gold, red, and green reflected under Christmas bulbs as if each stitch held its own wish. Every stocking looked different, personal, and proud. Kids hung them by the mantel and watched the light dance across them. Even if the seams weren't perfect, they carried more love than anything store-bought. The sequins would fall off by January, but by then, the memory had already taken root. Each glittering thread said the same thing. We may not have much, but we make beauty out of what's ours. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Wild rice pudding combined indigenous grains with African-inspired preparation to create a dish both nourishing and subtly sweet. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes and slow rivers, and enslaved families near these wetlands harvested the dark grains with paddles and baskets, drying them in the sun for year-round use. Cooked slowly in water until tender, the rice was stirred with a bit of sorghum syrup or honey if available, making a warm pudding that supplied protein and lasting energy. Its nutty flavor and satisfying texture turned a simple bowl into a special treat, especially when fresh fruit or spices could be added. This recipe carried forward after emancipation as African American cooks continued to value wild rice for festive meals and family gatherings. Modern chefs still celebrate its earthy richness, but the story behind wild rice pudding honors the blend of native and African foodways that sustained people through scarcity and created a dessert that is at once humble and deeply rooted in the shared history of America's wetlands and kitchens. Homemade cane. Syrup drizzle once gave biscuits and pancakes a dark, smoky sweetness unmatched by refined sugar. Families would harvest sugarcane, crush the stalks, and boil the juice in large iron kettles until it thickened into a rich amber syrup. The work was hot and sticky, often stretching from dawn until late night, but the reward was a flavor that defined Southern breakfasts and holiday treats. Children watched the bubbling kettles with wide eyes, waiting for a chance to taste the warm syrup on a fresh biscuit. Neighbors often shared the labor and the finished product, turning the syrup-making into a community event as well as a culinary one. Over time, industrial sweeteners and store-bought syrups replaced the careful craft, and the knowledge of how to coax sweetness from cane faded with older generations. For those who remember, a spoonful of homemade cane syrup is more than a taste. It is a memory of family unity, hard work, and the sweetness that perseverance can bring. Fried bream with hush puppies was a meal born from rivers, ponds, and hands that knew how to fish. Bream, small and plentiful, cost little more than the time spent catching them. My grandmother cleaned the fish, rolled them in cornmeal, and fried them crisp in hot oil until the skin crackled golden brown. Hush puppies bubbled alongside, little cornmeal fritters that were cheap to mix and cooked quickly. Together, they made a dinner that felt rich without draining a wallet. Families gathered around plates piled high, dipping hush puppies into hot sauce or eating them plain while the fish cooled. The taste was pure Southern tradition, simple, salty, and tied to the land and water. In the 1960s, when grocery stores were expensive, fishing poles and cast nets provided meals for families who had little to spare. Fried bream with hush puppies was more than food. It was a reminder of resourcefulness and community, where the catch of the day fed everyone at the table. Molasses glazed ham steak was the kind of dish that filled the house with perfume, sweet, smoky, and dark with caramel. Before full hams became common, families made do with thick slices cooked in a skillet, basting them in brown sugar and molasses until they shone. The glaze clung like velvet, the edges crisping just enough to give each bite a hint of crunch. Served alongside greens or yams, it was a holiday meal that looked like indulgence, but came from thrift. The molasses brought a depth no sugar could match, rich with the echo of the cane fields and the resilience of those who worked them. The ham steak symbolized progress, a small taste of prosperity earned through labor. When it hit the table, it gleamed like something far grander, its sweetness melting into the gravy and the memory of the meal. It was humble, yet it felt like victory. Pineapple. Upside-down cake was a burst of sunshine on cold December days. With its caramelized fruit rings and cherries shining like jewels, it brought color to tables that had seen too many brown desserts. Pineapple was exotic once, a prized treat that arrived in cans and made even the simplest home feel worldly. For African American families in the mid-century South, this cake was a symbol of hope and joy, a little escape baked right into tradition. The sugar on the pineapples bubbled into a golden glaze, seeping down through the sponge until every crumb was moist and bright. When flipped out of the pan, it was magic, sweet, glossy, and proud. Served warm, it reminded families that celebration didn't need to be grand to be beautiful. pineapple upside-down cake was optimism on a plate, the promise of sweetness even in the leanest of years. Chinquapin nut cakes offered small moments of sweetness, created from the rich forests of the American South. The chinquapin, a dwarf chestnut native to the region, produced small, sweet nuts that could be eaten raw or roasted. Enslaved families collected these nuts in autumn, cracked their shells, and ground the meat into a fine meal. Mixed with a little cornmeal, honey, or molasses when available, the nut meal formed small cakes that were baked or cooked on a griddle until golden brown. These cakes carried both nutrition and a sense of celebration, providing rare treats for special gatherings. The flavor, slightly sweeter than a chestnut with a buttery finish, became a cherished memory passed down through generations. Even after emancipation, chinquapin nuts remained a prized wild harvest in Appalachian and southern communities, though the trees have grown scarce in modern times. Chinquapin nut cakes remind us of the connection between forest abundance and human creativity, transforming a foraged ingredient into a dessert that honored both the landscape and the people who carefully tended its secrets. Homemade cracklins were a prized treat made from pork skins, fried until golden and crisp. Families would render down hog fat and save the skins, cutting them into pieces that crackled in hot lard as they cooked. The result was crunchy, salty, and deeply flavorful, often eaten with cornbread or sprinkled over greens. Nothing went to waste, and cracklins were proof of how families found ways to enjoy even the humblest scraps. They carried a strong connection to hog butchering days, when entire communities gathered to process a hog and share every part of it. Cracklins added texture and flavor to otherwise plain meals, and for many, they were a reminder of both thrift and celebration. Though inexpensive, they carried a sense of richness and taste that lifted spirits. Homemade cracklins showed how food could be both practical and deeply satisfying, even in the hardest of times. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Sweet potato soufflé with marshmallow topping was the shining centerpiece of mid-century holiday tables, where Southern comfort met post-war aspiration. The base was creamy and spiced, whipped until smooth with sugar, milk, and eggs. Then came the marshmallows, soft, white, and toasted golden under the oven's heat. It was a dish that belonged to celebration, a sign that sweetness could still survive hardship. Every forkful was warmth and nostalgia, a blend of the old and the new. Black families embraced it as a statement of joy, a dessert disguised as a side, rich enough to feel luxurious even in modest homes. The sweet potatoes brought earthiness, the marshmallows added playfulness, and together they made something that looked like light itself. The first bite was always followed by a pause, that silent recognition of memory on the tongue. In homes where food carried meaning beyond taste, this soufflé was proof that comfort could be beautiful. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. Stewed oxtails with rice gravy brought deep flavor and slow-cooked richness to Sunday tables across many African American communities. Oxtails, once inexpensive and overlooked, were browned in heavy pots and then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until the meat turned buttery soft. The braising liquid thickened into a silky gravy that clung to each grain of rice, creating a dish that was equal parts comfort and celebration. Families saved this meal for weekends when everyone could gather because patience was essential and conversation flowed while the pot worked its magic. Children sneaked tastes from wooden spoons, drawn by the savory aroma that filled the house from morning until evening. The humble tale, once discarded by butchers, became a centerpiece of pride and ingenuity. Today, rising prices and faster cooking habits mean fewer people take the time to coax such tenderness from a simple cut of beef, but those who remember the meal speak of it as a perfect union of thrift, skill, and the slow rhythm of family life. Collard greens with smoked ham hocks were the heart of Christmas cooking in countless African American homes. The greens simmered low and slow for hours, their earthy scent filling the kitchen long before dinner was ready. Ham hocks gave them depth, salt, and smoke, the kind of flavor that came only from patience and thrift. Every bite told a story of making something rich from what little you had. The pot itself was a gathering place, stirred by mothers, aunts, and grandmothers who knew the rhythm of seasoning by heart. These greens were not just food, they were a blessing on the table, a wish for good fortune in the coming year. In many families, a pot of greens sat beside cornbread and turkey, representing money, luck, and perseverance. During hard times, ham hocks were often saved or traded for, treated like gold. The aroma of collards became part of Christmas itself, a signal that family was near and that celebration could still be soulful, even when pockets were thin. Cooking them meant remembering those who came before and honoring the work it took to put a meal together. Greens were a sermon in a pot, humble ingredients turned sacred through care.
If your family made any of these, tell us which one in the comments. And if you know someone who still bakes a proper caramel cake or a real sweet potato pie from scratch, do not let that recipe leave this world without writing it down. That is the only bakery that is left, the one in your family's memory.